Hello, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Sarah Edens, a finance coach, author, and wealth mindset researcher, and I'm so happy you chose to join me today. As part of my Recession Watch series, we're talking about practical ways that you can be prepared for a recession, whether that's in 2024, 2025, or any year in the future, because they're part of the market cycle. And you can watch my entire playlist about recessions. I will link to that in the description as well. And first and foremost, I want to say welcome to all of my new subscribers. We had a bunch of new subscribers who joined us just in the last couple of days. And so I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you very much for coming and joining and being part of our community. Okay, so let's jump right into the ways that you can get yourself prepared for a recession. And the number one thing is to really do what you're doing right now and take a proactive approach to planning for recessions. Rather than waiting for it to come and getting surprised and not being ready, it's always good to have a game plan that you can roll out when it comes to recessions, because just like bad weather, recessions happen. Think of them kind of like bad weather for the economy, if you want to think about it that way. They happen. They're part of the normal business cycle. And so the more that you're able to take a proactive approach, the less you'll feel caught off guard by those things. And so being proactive in this situation just really means recognizing that they happen, having a game plan that you can roll out and run with when they occur, and then just working ahead of time to make sure that you and your family are prepared for that kind of a scenario, rather than trying to deal with it on the fly if it happens, having maybe never thought about it much before, never really planned for it, not having a plan in place for what you're going to do to kind of shore up your financial picture if something happens to your job, for example, or something happens with the economy that affects everyone's ability to do as well as we normally do, right? And so that's kind of the first thing, is to take that proactive approach to recessions, to planning for recessions, and just be ahead of the game that way, which you're already doing by watching this Recession Watch series. The second thing that you can do to plan for recessions is to recognize the psychological impact they have on people. So this is something that really gets back around to mindset. And if you're new to this channel, we talk a lot about mindset on this channel. We talk a lot about the psychology of money as well as practical financial skills. And so this is an area where mindset is really important, because it is really good to realize that recessions do tend to have a pretty outsized psychological and emotional impact on people. And sometimes that's well before they happen. Sometimes just the worry about, is there going to be a downturn? Am I going to lose my job, for example? Or am I going to make less money than I'm used to making? Are times going to get hard? Just worrying about that ahead of time can be kind of a strain, as well as then after a recession hits and you're there dealing with situations that you don't normally deal with, or financial hardships that you might not normally encounter. And so it's really important to just realize that they are psychologically stressful and challenging, and to just be aware that that is how it affects all of us who end up having to go through those things. And whether it's a minor downturn or a major downturn, having the right mindset is key in terms of just realizing that that's a big stressful situation to go through. And so really beginning to just have that recognition of, okay, this is a difficult time. This is a difficult situation when these things happen. And so being in that space where you have the ability to know that you can cope with a difficult situation like that as well, because you've thought ahead, you've planned ahead. And then also too, realizing for many of us that how much of our self-esteem and our self-worth is tied up in our job. And so then if you lose your job, that can start to have an enormous outsized toll on your self-esteem and your self-worth. And so in many ways, it's also really helpful to realize that you're not your job, right? Like very often we get valued for what we do. We get valued for how much money we make in the culture that we live in these days, but you are not your job. And so really being able to see yourself as a multifaceted individual, that yes, your job is part of what you do. It's a really important part of what you do, but you have many, many other skill sets as well, and many other things that make you you. And so just being able to also think through, should you lose your job, have to change jobs, have to full up change industries, for example, that it's not going to ruin your mental health because you're not devastated by your job loss because all of your identity was tied up in your job or in, a lot of times too, it comes down to we have a team of people that we work with at work who we're close to. And so losing those work connections and those social connections can be really devastating as well if those are the people that you've worked with and problem solved with and built connections with over maybe a very long amount of time, and then you get let go from your job, and that can be really difficult as well. So also it's good to build connections outside of your current job, build connections outside of your workplace. Make sure that not all of your friendships are at work. Try to make kind of a more diversified approach to your social support that way as well. And that can be helpful too. That way you've got friends who aren't just at the office should something happen to your job. So just kind of thinking through the way that recessions hit people. There's a great book that I'll link to in the description below that was actually written. It's the journal of a man who was an attorney who was during the Depression in the 1920s and 30s. And he was keeping this diary. And so it's called the Depression Diary. And it's a really interesting book if you like history and want to go read about what it was like going through the worst depression in American history, the worst economic downturn in American history, what that was really like coming from his perspective. It's a very interesting read. And you can learn a lot from looking at people who have gone through difficult times like that financially and economically and be able to say, well, what worked for them? What worked with their mindset and what helped them be resilient and thrive during those difficult times, because difficult times will come. And so the more that we're proactive about planning for them, recognize the psychological impact of those things on us and our mental health, then they're just not so damaging. Plus, we don't have to be as worried about them happening because we have kind of built some resilience ahead of time into the way that we approach life. So that's a really useful thing as well. Number 3, again, gets back to resilience, and you want to start building your financial resilience, your personal resilience now before you need it. And I found a really good definition of resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity, learn from your experiences, and become stronger in the process. I'll read that again. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity, learn from your experiences, and become stronger in the process. And basically, I really value the concept of resilience. It's something that I teach a lot here on my channel, particularly in relationship to making your finances more resilient and more robust, and having things like an emergency savings account so that you don't run into a hard time and suddenly have no way to pay your rent or pay your mortgage, or you're really suddenly concerned about how you're going to buy groceries, put gas in the car, maybe make car payments. So just as much as you can do now to start really shoring up your financial picture will really build that financial resilience in for you now and make you so much calmer going into whatever's going to happen, because you will have already planned ahead and begun to put pieces in place to have some emergency savings to fall back on, and to start having that more resilient mindset and resilience approach to life so that you can build that when you don't need it, so that then when you fall in a hard time, it doesn't crush you. Because for many people who don't plan ahead for difficult times, they can hit them and sometimes it really crushes them. It is just something that sometimes life just gets really hard. And I don't want that for you. I want you to be able to be someone who really is able to thrive in difficult times because you've already done the work ahead of time. You've already done the preparedness. You've already started building your financial resilience, your personal resilience, and really started to understand that difficult times are just as much a part of life as the good times. And while they can be challenging, they can also present really great opportunities for personal growth as well. So they're not all bad. Sometimes when we go through our most difficult times, that's when we build new skills and learn new things that then make us come out stronger on the other side of whatever it was than before. And also, I think when we're challenged with difficult things, we sometimes find that we have inner reserves of strength, or learn how to ask for help, reach out and ask for help when we need it, or that we're able to do things we didn't think we'd be able to do until we're really, tested. And then we find out that we're stronger than we thought we were, or, maybe that our financial picture was better than we thought it was, and we're giving ourselves credit for. our financial skills were better than we thought they were. And so often these difficult experiences can be a real testing ground from which we can emerge stronger and more resilient. And that's what I want for you. So the more you can start building in that personal resilience, that financial resilience now, before we have whatever downturn we're going to have whenever it happens, that will really help you out as well. Number 4, and this really gets down to resilience as well, is to make your income streams more resilient by diversification. So what do I mean by diversification? So what I'm talking about there, picture a bucket with multiple faucets running into it. And if you have just one faucet that's filling your bucket and somebody shuts that faucet off, there's no more water that's coming in to fill that bucket. And so you can think about that same thing with your income. If you only have one person in your family working and you've only got money coming in from your paycheck, and suddenly you lose your job or you get furloughed, for example, and there's no more water coming into that bucket, then that becomes a really big problem really quickly, as you're not having money coming in to be able to pay the bills, pay the rent, pay the mortgage, all of these really important things that have to happen for us to have security in our lives and have our needs met. And so what you want to do is to have multiple faucets. And so that can look like multiple people in the family working, which I imagine you probably have that already. But it can also mean side gigs. It can mean part-time work. It can mean freelance work. Just anything you can think of that can bring in a little bit of extra money and just start a new faucet, putting water into your bucket, can really be very, very good. And again, the sooner you start that, the better, because you don't want to hit a point where you've only had one income stream from your house for your household going on, that one faucet, the faucet gets turned off. And then it can be really challenging, especially in a down economy, to make more money. It can just get really tough because everybody else is suddenly in the same boat with you and looking also for ways to make more money. And so there might be a lot of competition and a lot of other people trying to do the same thing. So the sooner you have your income diversified with multiple faucets filling your bucket, the better. And it can even just be two. Let's just say you've got a job and your spouse has a job. That's great. That's income diversification. I guess if you want to look at it, unless you're both working for the same company, and then in that case, maybe look at getting a side entrepreneurial job or doing some freelance work or something that's not related to the company that you both work for. So just kind of sit down and think it through with how that translates out for your family, for your household, and kind of get creative about different ways that you can start bringing in more income. I've got a couple of videos about that I'll link to in the description if you need some ideas just to brainstorm. Number 5 of ways that you can start preparing for the recession, and not just this recession, but any recession that we have coming up anytime throughout our adult lives, because I'm sure there'll be more than just the one they have forecast for 24 and 25, is to create an emergency fund. So we touched on this a little bit when I was talking about financial resilience, but you will hear every single financial professional in the industry preaching that you need an emergency fund. Well, why is that? Why is it important to create that fund with anywhere from 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses in it? Why is that so important? Well, it just gets back down to, if you're spending everything you're making, which many of us are right now just because of inflation and the way that our wages haven't kept up with inflation and higher prices, it is really important to think about, if that faucet gets turned off, you still have water coming back out of the bucket that's going to go back out to pay your mortgage and pay your grocery bills and pay your rent and so forth. You can think about like that. If that water in the bucket is your money, it goes back out. Well, there's no more coming in. You're going to end up with an empty bucket really quickly. And so that's where it's good to have a savings bucket where you can pull from if you've got your income tap turned off and there's no more income coming in and you're there trying to figure out what to do. Well, you've got the second bucket that you can pull from to be able to pay for the things that you need to pay for. So in that bucket, you want to have anywhere from 3 to 6 months of the amount of money you would need so that you could pay your rent or your mortgage, that you could pay for healthcare expenses to take care of your health. You can pay for groceries, you can pay for pet food, you can pay for car loans so that you don't have something happen with your cars, and you can just keep all of your living expenses paid for acutely while you find a new way to have another tap to fill your bucket, or your job gets restarted if you were just temporarily furloughed, whatever your situation might be. And so that's something that's really, really critical to think through, is just to have that emergency savings bucket. That will really help you. And that's probably the number one thing, other than mindset work and practicing your kind of mental toughness, your resilience, is to get that emergency savings bucket filled up as quickly as possible, so that you know that you're good for 3 to 6 months, and you'd be cutting back on all of your want spendings, for example, but just to cover your needs, and that you're not going to be out in the cold the minute your job stops paying you, for example, and it's not going to be an absolute crisis. It just gives you some padding in your budget, gives you some wiggle room in your financial life, and some resilience that way as well. So that's highly, highly, highly recommended. I probably should have made that as like number 1 or number 2, but definitely start working on an emergency fund if you don't have one already. The other thing too is I do not recommend investing your emergency fund because you want to make sure that you've got it in a place that you can tap into it really easily, and also that's not subject to market volatility. So if you're an investor, I would highly recommend that you keep your emergency fund in a savings account. You can look into a high yield savings account and get a little bit better interest rate potentially off of your money in your savings bucket there. But definitely, I don't recommend investing it, because particularly if it's a time of market volatility, you don't want your emergency savings to suddenly drop in value with a market crash just when you need it. So that's one of those things that I personally advise people to hang on to in cash. You don't even have to have a lot of your other assets in cash, but that's a good one to have just so you can tap into it in a crisis should you need to. All right, number 6 of how you can start preparing for a recession is to start investing more in yourself. So this is something that I talked about in a recent video as well, about the ways that I was investing myself professionally this year. And it's something that you hear a lot of people talk about how it's really important to invest in yourself. Think of this as a long-term investment. So if you start now in thinking through how can you make yourself either more valuable at your current job and more irreplaceable, if you want to think about it that way, at your current job, or if you want to think through how can you invest in your skill sets, invest in your education in a way that really makes you stand out to other employers should you need to go job hunting again. Maybe invest in some skill sets of starting an entrepreneurial business on the side, whatever that looks like for you, but really to begin to really invest more in your professional skills, and particularly in marketable skills that are going to be able to help you either get better pay at your current job, level up your financial life that way, start a second job as an entrepreneur, just whatever that looks like for you. But that's something else that's a really good thing to really start anytime. And that doesn't even have to be around just preparing for recessions. That can be kind of a lifelong process of continuing to invest in yourself, because while it can take some time for that investment in yourself, your skills, your education, and so forth to pay off, it really is the number 1 best investment that you'll ever make is in yourself. And the thing too to remember is that while somebody might be able to lay you off, they cannot take your skill sets away. And so you can take your skill sets and go work for someone else. You can take your skill sets and work for yourself as an entrepreneur, whatever that looks like, but nobody can take your skill sets away once you've invested in them for yourself. And so that's something that is also makes you more resilient in a difficult time, because you have these skill sets that just because you got laid off from your job does not mean that your skill sets are gone or worthless at all. They're still just as valuable as they were before. You're just maybe needing to shift jobs or shift over to another employer. Number 7 of recession preparedness tips here is to stay connected. And this is something that is so important. So it's really critical to maintain a strong network, both professionally and personally, that can help get you through difficult times. Because when we fall on difficult times, the best thing to have is a good network of people to reach out to for help, reach out to for support, and just recognize that we're not having to go it alone during difficult times. So that's something that's really good. Professionally, I've found that one of the best platforms to connect with other people, both in and out of my industry, is LinkedIn. So I just got on there in the last year, and that's been a really great experience of connecting with other professionals. I've had some great opportunities come my way through that already. And so that's something to really look into if you're just getting started networking. You can network at work. You can also do all kinds of things in your local community to meet people, whether that's in your neighborhood, your town. Volunteer work is always a great way to meet people. So just whatever you find, doing hobbies, you'll meet people doing things that way. But just anything you can do to really bolster the number of people in your kind of social safety net, if you want to think about it that way, because there's a great and timeless saying that says it's not what you know, but who you know. And so the people you meet may be the people who will help connect you with your next job if you're going through a layoff, or they might be people that can just be encouraging to you during a difficult time. So that's a really good thing to start thinking about, especially if you're not really big into networking or it's not something that comes naturally to you, to just start doing a little bit. I mean, even sometimes that's as simple as just getting to know your neighbors a little bit or getting to know the people at work a little bit better. So that's a really good thing to think through as well in terms of preparedness. And then eighth and final is to practice mindfulness and positivity. And when I say that, I am not saying to get all Pollyanna here, but what I'm talking about is that when we are calm and when we are centered and we're not panicking, and it's very easy to panic when we're talking economic downturns, it is something that kind of instantly sets off all of our fight or flight mechanisms. So the more mindful and calm and centered and generally positive outlook you have going into a difficult situation, whether it happens this year or any other time with a big recession, is to just stay calm, because they've shown in studies that our brains actually work much better and more efficiently. We actually make better decisions when we're calm and when we're grounded and centered than when we're in a panic mode. Our brains physically work differently when we're panicked and stressed and scared than when we're calm and centered and mindful and grounded. So whatever it takes for you to get to that space, everybody kind of has their own way of centering themselves and their own way of being connected to the things that give you joy, connected to the things that kind of help you stay focused on what's most important in life. But anything that you can really do to build those skills of not getting sucked into a lot of alarmism or a lot of panic. I know a lot of times reading the news can be very scary because it can just be like bad headline after bad headline, and it's easy to get really worked up over that. And so just being able to stay calm during a time when maybe a lot of other people are panicking is really critical to be able to then kind of keep a level head and be able to continue to make good decisions in a difficult situation and stay calm, and also realize that usually the worst doesn't happen. And even when it does, people tend to pitch in and help each other out. I have seen this time and time again in my own life where, you'll be so worried about, oh my gosh, the worst is going to happen here. And then not only does it not happen, but, if people are going through a hard time, other people are there reaching out to them and helping them out. And so people tend to really come together during times of crisis in ways that are really heartwarming, to be honest. And so it's really important to just be able to go into something like this with that kind of balanced perspective of, yeah, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to get my emergency savings, bucket filled up. I'm going to do all these things, but I'm also not going to go into this expecting the absolute worst outcome here, or feeling like, oh my gosh, nobody would help me if there was a hard time. It's really important to remember that people tend to pull together during hard times rather than go apart. They tend to come together and get through things, whether that's in your family, your community, your workplace, and so on. And just being able to have, again, that mindset of being able to reach out for help should you need it. So that is everything for today's video about 8 different ways that you can be more prepared for this recession, for any other recession. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video, and I will see you again soon in the next one.